Dear Father Spitzer, now my neighbor and I keep debating the difference between faith and religion. He insists we do not need religion, just faith in God. How do I explain that religion is so much deeper than simply faith, and I need the Catholic Church to fully practice my faith? And this is Mike. We hear a lot about this, sometimes it's spirituality versus religion, etc. Right?
Yeah, Mike, here's the basic thing. Of course, there is, God does communicate with us interiorly, and we can have a kind of faith, but a very uninformed faith through that spiritual awareness that we have. But in every single culture throughout the world, every one of them, what happens to people the minute they have that sense of the numinous, that sense of the mysterious, the holy other that's calling them into the domain of the sacred? The minute they have that, what do? They want to find out first, who is God? Mm-hmm. You want to sit there with your own private spirituality, your own private faith. That doesn't sound like a great idea to me, because I couldn't tell you the who of God at all. Now, I can tell you this by proofs for the existence of God and by looking at certain kinds of scientific evidence for the beginning of our universe or the beginning of physical reality or the fine-tuning of constants at the beginning of the Big Bang, etc. I could probably tell you that an intelligent God exists, or that a unique, unrestricted, unconditioned, uncaused being who is the creator of all else that is exists. All else that is exists. Now, I totally think you could prove that rationally and show that to be true. But you won't get the who of God. You won't get the heart of God. You won't know whether He's loving or unloving, whether He calls you to goodness or not goodness, what the good is, and how to be accountable to the good, and if there's a salvation or there's not a salvation. And if there is a salvation, how do you get there and not move toward the opposite, toward a hell, or if there's a hell or if there's not a hell? How are you going to know all this stuff? You think you're going to know it by intuition? You think you're going to sit there in your bedroom and read a bunch of books and sort it all out and know the path to go down? You won't. I'm telling you, there's a million books, there's a million opinions, you can get all the stuff you want, there's every kind of philosophy under the sun, you can get anything you want, but you won't know the who of God. You'll never know how to direct yourself, never know how to direct your own religious urges, you'll never know how to practice your faith, you'll never know whether you're oriented toward heaven, you'll never know whether God's calling you to heaven, you'll never know whether God's guiding you, you'll never know how God's guiding you, you'll never know how God's inspiring you, if indeed He's inspiring you, you'll never know how God's protecting you, if indeed He is protecting you. You'll never know what the law is. You'll never know what God's mind is. You'll never know what God's will is for you. You'll never know. You'll never definitively know. You might have a bunch of conjectures, but the bunch of conjectures, I can tell you this right now, sitting on your bed contemplating at night, those bunch of conjectures all become a big mush because you have no sense of certitude about any of it. Mm-hmm. Of course you need a religion. Of course God has to reveal Himself to human beings. And, if anybody tells you private revelation is the way it goes, look at history. God doesn't just reveal Himself to private individuals in history, and everybody has their own separate ray of God. Mm-hmm. God reveals Himself to certain kinds of prophetic figures. God reveals Himself to, of course, in Christianity, through His own Son who comes and becomes incarnate in our midst. And I think there's very good evidence of that. But the point I'm trying to get to is, of course, you need to be told by God who He is so you can definitively know. Mm. So the thing is it's not do we need a church, do we need revelation? It's what church is the best to follow, what revelation is the best to follow. Now, as I've said many times on the program, Friedrich Heiler has, his 7 common characteristics of all world religions. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really good starting point. You can say, okay, there's these 7 characteristics, and that's very nice. But then there's such a wide range of difference between how those 7 characteristics interrelate to each other and how they affect our lives. You have to find a definitive test for which religion is the case. And the best definitive tests you can get are twofold. Number one, you can begin to look at the moral teaching of that particular church or revelation, and corresponding to to your own formation of your conscience interiorly. And more important, look at the evidence. Look at the evidence for the resurrection. Look at these apostles right after the time of Jesus actually doing these miracles in the name of Jesus. I mean, why would the divine power be manifest through these apostles raising people from the dead in the name of Jesus if Jesus is completely false and he's not risen from the dead as they've said? I mean, Paul uses this argument again and again. And of course, there's so much evidence for the miracles of Jesus, so much evidence for, Christianity just surpassing every messianic movement there ever was, right? You execute and kill a Messiah, and that's it. The movement dies in 6 months. Not Christianity. It begins to exponentially increase until it takes over the Roman Empire in 300, not even 300 years. So, of course, it's just the most amazing thing you have ever seen. I mean, there's lots of evidence. There's evidence, too, that we can judge from N.T. Wright, et cetera, which we've talked about here, the mutations of Second Temple Judaism that enable us to get a real hold on the resurrection of Jesus. Also, the Shroud of Turin, I just think is just filled with enough scientific evidence of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection, precisely according to the biblical accounts. So you've got to verify. You've got to verify with your mind. You've got to verify with science. You've got to verify in your heart. And I look at, the moral teaching of Jesus, and I say to my question is not, do I like it? That's not the question. Is it true? I mean, okay, I look at Christianity's moral teaching and go, whoo, some of this stuff's pretty hard, and I'm far from the mark. Yike-o-rama. Now, that's one reaction. I might say, yike, but do I think that it is true? In my heart of hearts, I do. It may be hard, but I think this is the way. I think Jesus, I've got enough historical evidence, enough scientific evidence to say, I think Jesus is risen from the dead, that miracles still happen today in the name of Jesus. I think all these things are going on. I think there's evidence going everywhere. Look at these Marian miracles. Look at Guadalupe and the image of the eye. Look at all these things, the Eucharistic miracles. You just look, just examine, go to crediblecatholic.com. I'm begging you. Just go there, click on the 7 essential modules, and you get more evidence than you could ever want. You put all this together, and there I think you're pointing to Jesus Christ, who instituted the Catholic Church himself. It's pointing right to there. Here's the source of revelation. But do you need a source of revelation? Absolutely. You'll never figure it out for yourself. Trust me on this. You sit there in your room, you'll become the very same mush that your head is trying to sort out. It won't do. You can't tell. You have no way of criteriorizing the heart of God without God's self-revelation. Find out what the best source of self-revelation is. You subject that to historical investigation, scientific investigation, and moral investigation. I tell you, will come out with Christianity every time. And if Christ really appointed Peter into an office of highest authority, then the Catholic Church is the one you ought to go for. And I think that's your best bet. But sitting on your bed privately in your room with your own private spirituality will get you nowhere and accountable to nothing and no direction in life. And if you have no goals, let me tell you, any road will get you there.
That's a good point. And of course, I always think of with the journey home with Marcus Grode, I always talks about authority and how many people, it's a search for authority of realizing, well, I'm interpreting this one, then the guy next door is a good man, he's interpreting it differently. And ultimately, if you're doing what they suggest, it's basically the Church of Doug or the Church of Bob or the Church of whoever, because ultimately you're the Pope for your own little church, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I don't want to be the Pope for myself because I know how ignorant I am and how I cannot possibly sort out the morass of not just philosophies, but of so-called theologies and so forth and so on. It's just impossible. I mean, there's no, I don't have enough IQ points to even understand, half of these things, let alone, sort them out. I mean,
but that is the attraction
God,
for a lot of people up front, is this perception that they can somehow feel as if they're being spiritual without having a lot of rules or regulations that they have to live up to.
Yeah, that's right. Feel without knowledge, feel without appropriate action toward goals. The objective is to get to heaven. The objective is to please God. And we better find out from God who he is, and we better find a source of revelation, because it's probably not us. It really is not. And you can tell just by your own demeanor, by your own selfishness, by your own imperfections, it's probably not you.
Right.
So look for a church, look for revelation, and if you keep looking at Jesus Christ, you'll see the evidence. And if you keep looking at what he did with respect to starting a church, you'll see Peter, you'll see the Catholic Church.
Right, and what people need to understand is, and when they see the scandals and the problems out there, as Father Benedict Rochelle used to say, if you find a perfect church, you run, because that it can't be. Because if there are people in it, as Sheen used to say, it's filled with hypocrites. He'd say, well, why don't you come in? We have room for one more. So that kind of idea, we have to remember how that works.